Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the live draft assistant, free agent finder, and lineup optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code Knuckler. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to a state near you. They're giving out boosts, slashing lines, giving out bonuses all day long. Check it out. Getting some DFS player prop contests. It's a real fun platform over there. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 160 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. And we've got UFC 310 this weekend.
Break out the red panties.
And folks, we have also got one fight night. We've got LFA. We've got we've got Navarrete. There's one in the Octagon this weekend. Anthony Pettis FC on Sunday. A whole lot of action. For my picks on all that stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, leave favorable reviews and comments. Check out my MMA DFS value picks article that comes out on Friday afternoons, and come out to the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday. Let's talk about what you're doing for DFS and for betting on UFC 310. Very much looking forward to this card. We're coming off a 1-week UFC hiatus, and with me tonight, frequent guest co-host on Tap That. Give it up for Connor Bones Slone. Connor, how's the winter treating you down there in Florida?
It's cooled down quite a bit, which is actually pretty nice. That's a nice break from the warm weather. I'll tell you what was not nice was a weekend without fights. So ready to get back into it. This is a great card we're going to talk about and excited for it.
Well, did you get to catch any of the PFL championships that were on Black Friday that morning in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I didn't watch it live, but I saw a bunch of the finishes, and man, some of them are brutal.
Dude, it's like, for all the problems that there might be with PFL's business model that we just don't know yet, the playoff format leading to a championship fight for $1 million is absolute brilliance for viewing.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. And I remember seeing some people online talking about that girl that won. I can't remember her name, but she had a really brutal finish, and she's gonna be a star. She looked very impressive. They were saying, oh, she needs to come to the UFC. Like, she's UFC ready right now. She'd be a great addition. And I'm like, why would she go to the UFC? She just won what she'd make in 4 fights, like maybe 4 fights if she was lucky. She's made $1 million in PFL. She has no incentive to go to the UFC, at least right now, in my opinion. But I don't know. Maybe she'll prove me wrong.
And you're referring to Dakota Dachiva out of England, and she legitimately might be the best flyweight in the world.
Yeah, she's very impressive.
And so, yeah, why not? I mean, there's the risk there, because kind of like Kayla Harris, you make it to that championship fight, but you lose it and you don't get the $1 million. But right now, where she's at in the PFL flyweight division, I think why would you change that? Especially if you ever really want to you make the money and you really just want to prove that you're the best. Maybe, because we've talked about this at length, the UFC will eventually have to change the way that they pay people from the middle to top levels. When that comes and what it looks like, we don't know. But it's people like Dakota Dachiva that could actually change that. Because she's not only are people talking about her as maybe being #1 in the world, but she's actually got a really good fan base.
Yeah, exactly. It's just going to take people like her, that build up a fan base and know that they can consistently win that $1 million in the PFL and really don't have any doubt in themselves. Because, if you're getting that $1 million paycheck every year, why would you leave?
And I mean, for their heavyweight division, Dennis Goltsov just won $1 million. And I don't think Dennis Goltsov is he could be a top 15 heavyweight in the world. Maybe. But you don't even have to be top 15 in the world necessarily to collect on that $1 million. I don't see why more people don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I might throw myself in there for the heavyweight. I don't think I could win, but with how the heavyweight talent looks outside of the top 15, top 30 in the world, I'm sure I could win at least one fight. It'd be kind of funny. I mean, Billy McFarland won a fight on Karate Combat. I know I could beat him. And once again, asking all listeners to message Karate Combat and tell them I want a fight against Billy McFarland. I will legitimately take that and beat him up for, I mean, as low as $1,000. I don't even need to get paid. I just want to beat Billy McFarland up.
And did Billy McFarland won that fight? And I'm like, dude, maybe he did try to put on Firefest. Who knows? Like I didn't think he'd win this fight. Like but to move on to a more serious matter, I told you there was one topic specifically I wanted to discuss before we get into these picks. And I wasn't going to tell you what it was because I wanted it to be a surprise. This is introducing a new segment here on Tap That we'll do occasionally when Connor's on. We're going to discuss who is the Tito of the week.
Jealous of him. This guy can't even put a fucking sentence together, man. Are you kidding me right now? He's reaching for those grapes. He's trying to make his wine, and the wine's already sounding like a violin with that cheese and wine.
It's so funny. I'm slowly exposing my girlfriend to the sport of MMA, and one of the most rewarding things has just been the never ending content of Tito being an idiot. I mean, it just never stops. There's so much you can show people. It's a gift that never stops giving.
And so on that point, Connor, who is the Tito of the week? Is it John Jones or is it Jamal Hill?
Oh, it's absolutely Jamal Hill. And as much as I hate John Jones, if he put on a good performance, he still, I mean, him calling Tom Aspinall an asshole is very boneheaded and stupid. But I think Jamal Hill definitely takes the cake. I mean, look at what he said about Pereira. He's over there arguing with Jiri over who lost better to Pereira. And I think some of the things he said are just so funny. Like one of the things he said was, I wasn't knocked out. He just threw my equilibrium off. Like, bro, you were staring at the stars. And another thing he said, what did he say? He said, oh, yeah, you have to take advantage of a weird moment by the ref to win. Like, Jamal, you threw the first punch after that separation. He threw one very shortly after you. He timed your punch very well, but you threw first, buddy. You were prepared. You just got caught. I don't know. I think it's definitely Jamal. I think he's talking himself into a corner even more. If he somehow gets a rematch against Pereira, he's going to get obliterated again. There was a video I saw of Jamal Hill. I encourage the listeners to go find it. It's just a video of his footwork. I think it was in the Pereira fight specifically, but really any fight. Just look at his footwork. The dude is the most flat-footed fighter I've ever seen in my entire life. I can move around a cage better than he can, which was really saying a lot because, I'm no fighter. Yeah, so absolutely Jamal Hill. I think he'll be a regular winner on this segment.
Now, here's what I'll say. All right, and John Jones, an argument towards John Jones is that dude dedicated all of a holiday because we know he's not much of a family man. He dedicated a lot of a holiday to just responding to people on Twitter calling him a devil. And he's had to make a big, and maybe he's actually playing this really smart. I will give him this credit. This might just be to get more money out of, setting up a fight with Tom Aspinall. Is that the fight worth that amount of money to the brass? I don't know. But to put a little bit of defense for Jamal Hill, people do like to go back and pretend that this guy sucks. And I don't think it's fair when we go back and you actually look at the people that he fought. The fact that I don't care how he did it. I don't care that he didn't defend it. He was the UFC light heavyweight champion at one point. So at the very least, people do like to go back and pretend that Jamal Hill sucks, and he doesn't. He's not the best light heavyweight in the world. I think we have very clearly seen that. But I can at least say that the hate it has been deserving for him. At the same time, I don't want it, kind of like we're going to get to in this co-main event, I don't want it to make me forget about who the fighter actually is and what they have accomplished to get to where they are. I will at least say that in his defense.
Yeah, it's totally fair. And part of me does agree with you. I think some of my hate for Jamal kind of blinds me on this topic, but I would agree. I don't think he sucks. I think he's a good light heavyweight. I think he definitely beats a lot of people. I don't think he's elite. I think he's overrated. I think Pereira exposed him, honestly, even though it was such a short fight. And I think anytime he fights someone as high level, especially as Pereira, but even Jiri, I think Jiri is going to handle him pretty easily. The way Jiri fights, yeah, he'll get caught a few times, he'll get punched a few times, but I think Jiri's movement and his range and just his athleticism is gonna do leaps and bounds for him, and I see him winning. But your topic wasn't who's the most overhated fighter of the week. It's who's the Tito of the week, and I give that to Jamal.
Well, that wine and cheese starting to sound like a violin. Jamal Hill is the Tito of the week. So let's just get right into UFC 310. All right. This event is going down in Las Vegas, Nevada. We've got a flyweight main event between Alexandra Pantoja and Kai Asakura, 21-4, 31 years old, coming to us as the champion from RIZIN. Interestingly about this dude, he's fought a lot of the Bellator guys, the Kyoji Horiguchis, the Juan Archuletas, who he's coming off a win against. He does have a loss, and he's beaten Kyoji Horiguchi. He's beaten Jae-Hyun Moon. He's beaten Manel Kape. He has now his last fight against Manel Kape, he got knocked out in the second round. But he's on a 2-fight winning streak in RIZIN, coming off of regaining the bantamweight belt against Juan Archuleta December of last year. Alexander Pantoja, on the other hand, this is a guy that we thought would lose this belt quickly after he gained it. We thought he was Brandon Moreno's kryptonite after he gained the belt back July of 2023. And listen to this winning streak, all right? His last loss was Askar Askarov back in July of 2020. Winning streak, Manel Kape, Brandon Royval, Alex Perez, Brandon Moreno, Brandon Royval, and Steve Ercik. Some people thought that, some of those were very close decisions. Some might say that they think he's a boring fighter. At the very least, this is a guy that we did not think would have this impressive of a title run. And Brandon Moreno and Brandon Royval are guys that if Pantoja didn't exist, they could be trading the belt back and forth for years. Hilariously, in this fight, Asakura gets an immediate title shot coming over from RIZIN, and Manel Kape is sitting there, saying,
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
So, the odds on this one, we got Asakura, the plus 205 underdog, Pantoja, the minus 240 favorite. I have to say, I am going to be rooting for Kai Asakura hardcore. I am absolutely going to be rooting for him. At the same time, the winning streak that he comes off of in RIZIN, it was a great story that he got that belt back, but this is a great, and it's kind of a win-win for the UFC, I guess. It's, you get a main event out of this, someone who's ready to come over when none of your younger guys are necessarily in the right spot to get this title fight. If Kai Asakura wins, it's a cool story. You get to kind of break more into the Japanese market. You can go back to Japan. But I have to say that, I see 1,000 scenarios playing out where Alexander Pantoja ends up getting this win by decision, most likely. Kai Asakura has never been submitted in his MMA career in 25 fights. Now, it doesn't mean Pantoja can't do it, but Pantoja by points, by decision right now on BetOnline is plus 350. By submission,
that's crazy.
By submission is plus 165. I'm going to attribute that to the market not knowing as much about Kai Asakura. I love Pantoja by decision plus 350. Over 2.5 rounds here is minus 135.
That's crazy. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Pantoja by decision is absolutely the play here. I think it's a really interesting matchup. I don't know. Part of me feels like Dana made this to prove a point. The best in the UFC is going to take care of the best outside the UFC easily. I don't think that's going to be the case here. I think Asakura he's going to be it's going to be a good competitive fight. I think Pantoja is too well rounded, and I think he just is too good at taking out the elite guys. I mean, if you look at his record against the current top 10 of the UFC in the flyweight division, he's 9-0. That's just pretty crazy to me. It feels like Pantoja, the better the competition gets, the better he performs. And one thing I love about Pantoja, he has that Dricus du Plessis cardio where he looks tired in the second round, and then he just continues his output till round 5. So I love Pantoja by decision here. I think it would be a good fight. It would be kind of cool to see Asakura come in and win a belt in his first fight. I feel like that may make Dana, it may piss him off a little bit, because then people start to question, well, are the UFC champs really the best in the world, or are there other champions out there that could, come in like this first fight in their debut and win the belt? So, either way, I think it's a win for the fans, but I think Pantoja by decision is definitely the way to go, especially at plus 350. That's crazy. Hammer that all day.
Yeah, and the crazy thing, I texted you about this last week or something, is interestingly, if a Sakura wins, there is a scenario out there in the world where Manel Cape gets a title shot, even not coming off of a win.
Yeah, I mean, it would be. I think there have been less justified title shots. I'd like to see that fight. I think another interesting matchup, and Tetsuro Taira, he's coming off a loss, so it's not an immediate matchup that would make sense. But Asakura versus Taira in Japan, that would be pretty sick. That'd be a great comeback fight, comeback main event for the UFC to go to Japan, I think.
That would be sick. And now to move on to a sick co-main event, Connor.
Somebody save him, because I don't want to see him with the 40-year-old gold-digging European.
We got Ian Gary versus Shavkat Rakhmonov in a welterweight co-main event. Ian Gary is the plus 291 underdog. Shavkat,
wow,
the minus 356 favorite. These guys are respectively ranked third for Shavkat and seventh for Ian in the world of welterweight, in the UFC at welterweight. It is very, very, very possible that the winner of this fight gets a title shot. I think that's what they would love to do. And, it kind of leaves Jack Della Maddalena in a bit of a weird spot. Hell, we got Colby Covington fighting Joaquin Buckley here next week. Of all things, Colby squats on his ranking, to borrow Ariel Hawani's term, for years, and then he hops in a fight night main event against Buckley. Unbelievable. You can't script this shit. But Ian Gary, now look, I'll give him the D-Rod knockout. Super impressive. The Song Kenan fight, he was in danger. Starting off, those first few UFC fights, he had impressive wins, but he was in danger in a couple of those spots, particularly Kenan Song. Knocks out Daniel Rodriguez in impressive fashion, does, pretty badly batters Neil Magny, gets a close win a fight that I think he did win against Jeff Neal, though I see where you say that Jeff Neal landed the more significant strikes. And then June of this year, UFC 303, he fights Michael Venom Page in a fight that I absolutely think MVP was the rightful winner of. And I'm trying to put aside the fact that I was rooting for MVP hardcore in that one. It's just like Ian Gary, I don't think did much there. I mean, as evidenced by 19 strikes and 2 takedowns. And even though MVP only landed 21 strikes through the course of that 3-round fight, every one of his, all of his strikes that he was landing and lunging forward and hitting Ian with those punches, those were meaningful shots. I thought MVP won that fight. I know that we've talked about this before. Shavkat Rakhmonov, also undefeated at 18-0. He got a very similar record. Finishes in all of his UFC fights against Alex Oliveira, Michael Prazeres, Carlston Harris. Then submits Neil Magny, submits Jeff Neal after landing 113 strikes. And then he's coming off a second-round rear naked choke against Wonder Boy back in December at UFC 296. Oh, my God, that's almost a year ago. I say back in December like it's February of 2024. So it's been a while for Shavkat. Ian and I at least will say, we've said this, right? We've said this about guys like Patty. It was said back in the day about Sean O'Malley. Some of these times, but mostly Patty Pimblett. As time goes on, you can only squeak out so many of these, and people want to see you move up the ranks. And Ian Gary, as he moved up to Jeff Neal, it got a little bit closer. And MVP, that was a fight that I think he was not the best fighter out of 2 of the guys in the octagon there. He's lucky to be undefeated right now. Shavkat's opponents are lucky that they're alive right now. That's the difference, And so I think that these odds are crazy. I think it is really taking a lot of credit away from the fact that Ian's body of work at least holds many of the same opponents, or at least caliber of opponents that Shavkat's does. So I think that like plus 291 is a little bit harsh for Ian, but I don't know. Like, I could see touching plus 91. Keep an eye on that one. But like Shavkat by submission plus 180. I like, it's hard to see Shavkat not finishing him. You know, like it's hard to see Shavkat not finishing anybody. It's hard to see, like, if this fight goes the way it's supposed. Like, I don't see how Ian Gary. I don't. If Shavkat is the better fighter out of someone right now, we just don't have like a sample of what it looks like to survive the distance with him. So, like, if I was going Ian, I would say Ian by decision, like staying off of the ground. That's plus 600, by the way. You know, using your striking to keep a distance and probably winning what would be a less exciting fight. People want to see Ian Gary get battered in this fight. We know that, like, everybody, there's people that love Ian Gary for sure, but a lot of people are going to be tuning in to see Ian Gary lose. And maybe that's undeserved. You know, it's not like he didn't, it's not like he didn't earn it at this point. You know, like, I think he knows what he is, and I think he plays into a lot of the things that are said about him on purpose. Because look, he's getting the co-main event of a pay-per-view event, and he's a big name. But like Shavkat, I think inside the distance, that is minus 155. I think that's a good number too. But like Shavkat by submission plus 180, I think is the most logical way to go. What do you think about this co-main event?
Yeah, I think I agree with pretty much everything you said. I will say that quote you had, Gary is lucky to be undefeated. Shavkat's opponents are lucky to be alive. That's sick. That's awesome and very true. And I'm trying to look at this objectively, because in the past and now, I really don't like Gary. I've picked opponents to beat him. I think I picked Jeff Neal and MVP. I do agree. I think MVP won that fight. I mean, Ian Gary, basically the only thing he did was cook his back and didn't do any damage. Didn't really threaten many submissions. So that was a very lame fight. I think that was another reason why I don't like Gary and why other people don't like Gary. Like, you come out there, you talk trash, you say you're going to piece up MVP, you're talking all this trash, and then you go out there and you turn into a wrestler against, a karate guy. Then you win, you're a karate guy. So that was insanely frustrating. But looking at this objectively, Shavkat is hittable. Jeff Neal tagged him a few times. But I think that kind of shows two things. Shavkat's hittable, but Shavkat is also very durable. He got cracked by Jeff Neal, and he barely was even wobbled. He might have been a little bit wobbled, but it's not like he got knocked down. So I do see Gary having some success on the feet, just because he's a crafty striker. He's quick. He's elusive. But I think Shavkat's just a bulldozer, and he's just going to end up bulldozing through Gary. I like Shavkat by submission a lot. I would love to see him get a knockout. I would love to see Gary sprawl out on the canvas unconscious. But I think by submission is the most likely outcome here. I think Shavkat has submitted better grapplers, and I don't see any reason for him not to be able to do the same to Gary here.
And not that it matters for this fight, but let's say that Ian Gary wins and he ends up fighting like Belal Muhammad for the title, and what would be the most hilarious matchup of people that people hate. Like, imagine people trying to pick who they're rooting for in that fight. But imagine Ian Gary fighting Belal Muhammad. You can envision a bunch of scenarios where Belal Muhammad wins that fight. Imagine Shavkat fighting Belal Muhammad right now. Like, it's a different thing. So not that it necessarily matters for this matchup, but it is important for what might be the next steps here. And, on that point, Ian Gary and Belal Muhammad, two guys that have figured out how to weaponize being made fun of. Like, if you can't make people like you, make people hate you. Because it's earned them big spots, So I think Ian Gary, at first, maybe he didn't know what he was exactly doing. I think it's hard for people to accept that, like, when their persona... Like, I think everybody wants to be, maybe not anymore. People used to always want to be Conor McGregor, and people wanted to be like the cool guy that was always saying witty stuff, or they want to be Chael, but that's not everybody. And I think it's hard for people to accept sometimes when you're the guy that everybody likes to make fun of. But if you can lean into it, it can be lucrative. And that's what we've seen with Ian Gary and Belal Muhammad. Really the whole welterweight division, like up to like number 10, up to a certain point.
Yeah. Better to be infamous than not famous at all.
And next up, we have a heavyweight matchup between two highly ranked dudes, Cyril Gahn and Alexander Volkov. Now, I have no idea how this could play into any sort of heavyweight title picture. I don't even know if there is a heavyweight title picture right now. What the next 10 years looks like for, or, what the next 5 years looks like for heavyweight is anybody's guess. If John Jones retires, does Tom Aspinall just run the table for that long? Who knows? But we got Cyril Gahn fighting Alexander Volkov. Alexander Volkov is the plus 285 underdog. Gahn the minus 350 favorite. Alexander Volkov, right, has a previous loss to Cyril Gahn by unanimous decision, getting outstruck 135 to 115. We know this is going to be a kickboxing match, but god damn, Connor, you look back to October of 2020, Alexander Volkov, the winner of 7 of 9 fights against Walt Harris, Overeem, Tybura, Jairzinho, Romanov, Tai Tuivasa, and most recently with that upset in that heated fight against Sergey Pavlovich, the only 2 losses that Alexander Volkov has taken over the last 4 years. Cyril Gahn by unanimous decision and Tom Aspinall by first-round submission. And notable, Alexander Volkov, born in 1988. Cyril Gahn will actually have a 1-inch reach advantage. He is about 2 years younger. Also kind of hard to judge here. Cyril Gahn, his activity has not been fantastic over the last few years, activity level, and so you go back to February 2021, beats Jairzinho Rozenstruik, beats Volkov in that fight, gets a knockout over Derek Lewis in the 3rd round, and where he, outstruck him 98-16 in that fight, has a knockout win over Tai Tuivasa, and a 2nd-round knockout most recently against Sergey Spivak, September of 2023 in the main event of UFC Fight Night. So over a year ago, and he has lost 2 of his last 4, but those 2 losses came to Francis Ngannou by unanimous decision. Francis Ngannou got 4 takedowns in that fight over the course of 5 rounds. And then he got finished like the easiest fight I have ever seen against John Jones at UFC 285. Connor, there's an old proverb that says never count out Alexander Volkov. I don't care if you've beaten him before, really. Volkov is a guy that, if they had some crazy thing, let's say Tom Aspinall got injured, John Jones retires, there is a universe in the next couple of years where Alexander Volkov could actually end up as the UFC interim heavyweight champion. I can't rule it out. It's not impossible. This fight was probably what that would be in a couple of years. It'd probably be the same exact 2 guys. I think that Cyril Gahn has always proven his kickboxing chops, but this fight, Alexander Volkov just always is there to surprise. He's never really done when we think he's about to be done. I think that Gahn is a rightful favorite. Just, he's younger. I think the more the result, you can't really count those 2 most recent losses. Those are the 2 heavyweights that are in a different stratosphere of stardom. But minus 350 seems kind of insane. Over 2.5 rounds in this fight is minus 325. The books seem to think that this fight is going the distance. Gone by decision minus 155, I think makes sense. Volkov by decision is plus 400. Either of these guys by split decision. Gone by split is plus 1,200. Volkov by split plus 1,600. I do think that this fight goes the distance, and I think Gone by decision makes the most sense, but I am getting tempted by Alexander Volkov just because one, I'm a fan of Alexander Volkov, and he was supposed to get obliterated by Sergey Pavlovich, and he looked phenomenal in that fight.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great matchup. It's a great rematch. One thing that you didn't mention, I'm interested if Volkov will try to employ any wrestling at all. I mean, I don't think he's the best heavyweight wrestler, not by a long shot, but unless Gahn has improved his ground game, there's a very clear weakness there. And if I'm remembering correctly, wasn't he able to get a takedown on Curtis Blades?
Yeah, 1 to Curtis Blades is 14 back in June of 2020. It's been 4 years since Alexander Volkov has had a takedown in the UFC. I will say.
Huh.
Now
Interesting.
he had 2 against Fabricio Verdum. Now Fabricio Verdum probably welcomed that opportunity. He was able to take down Stefan Struve, which I think like at the end of his career, probably a light breeze could have done that. But not to knock on Stefan Struve, I love Stefan Struve. He's just a giant beanpole. But I think the point remains that like if Alexander Volkov, I think that there has to be more mixed martial arts as opposed to just a straight kickboxing match. I think there are very few heavyweights in the world, or at least in the UFC, that can beat Cyril Gane in a straight up kickboxing match. So Volkov is going to have to employ, as much dirty boxing, as much clinching, as much grinding up against the cage. If he can get a takedown, I think that it's very much going to be available. The question is, does Volkov want to do that at this point? I don't know, but I do think that is a major key to victory, is like this fight IQ aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. And I'm not out here saying I think Volkov should hunt for a submission or anything, or that you should bet on Volkov by submission. But exactly what you said, it's an MMA fight. I think we saw what happens when Gane and Volkov square off in a kickboxing match. And I need to rewatch that fight because I don't really remember too much about it. I remember Gane being a clear winner. I don't remember if Volkov, how much success he had. But I think he just needs to employ some wrestling. Some clinching against the cage, just make it an MMA fight. And I think if he does that, he gives himself a good chance to win. That being said, I do give the edge to Gane. I think Gane is he's such a quick and elite striker that I think it will probably go the same way as the first time. But, Volkov has improved a lot, which is crazy to say because he's had 48 MMA fights and he's kind of just hitting his stride right now. So, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see Volkov get a win. I think if he does, he's in line for a title shot unless John Jones actually stops ducking, which at this point, I don't feel confident in it because if I expect the worst, then, if John Jones actually does fight Aspinall, I'll be pleasantly surprised. So if Volkov gets a win here, it's very possible he could somehow become a champion, exactly like you said. I think, overcoming Tom Aspinall is a whole different conversation. That's an extremely tough fight. But yeah, so Hart kind of says Volkov here. I think he's smart. I think he'll be able to kind of mix things up just enough to make it a more competitive fight. Either way, I do think by decision is the way to go. Those split decision odds really have me tempted because, even if it's not that close of a fight, we got some dumb judges. So, why not? It's not even a bet on if it's going to be a close fight. It's a bet on if there's a judge that night that is going to be stupid. So I love those odds.
And just to point out, Alexander Volkov did submit Tai Tuivasa by Ezekiel choke September 9th, 2023. It's his only submission victory in the UFC. And
your point,
that's more recent than Cyril Gane's last fight against Sergey Spivak. And that, by the way, Volkov by submission is plus 1,200. So,
yeah, I was going to say, screw it. You're making me want to throw money on Volkov by submission. Why not? It'd be funny if you could bet on specific submissions.
And now, Connor, quite possibly the most confusing fight of the main card. We got Bryce Mitchell versus Kron Gracie in a featherweight matchup. Bryce Mitchell had some interesting things to say about Tesla and the Earth and space this week, as he always does. But Bryce Mitchell is going to be the... Oh, where do they have this now? Son of a bitch. Bryce Mitchell is the minus 950 favorite. Jesus. Kron Gracie, the plus 650 underdog. All right, let's start with Kron Gracie real quick. Loser of 2 of 3 fights in the UFC. Only win being against Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres over 5 years ago by submission. Then he lost 2 straight decisions to Cub Swanson and Charles Jourdain. Bryce Mitchell, on the other hand, only lost 2 in the UFC, has wins over the likes of Tyler Diamond, Andre Fili, Edson Barbosa, and Dan Ige. 2 losses, one by arm triangle to Ilia Topuria. That doesn't look that bad in hindsight. And then a first-round knockout loss that sent him to outer space, ironically, against Josh Emmett, December of 2023. So, Here's the thing about Bryce Mitchell. Like, he got this reputation as a submission artist at some point because of that twister against Matt Sales. Every other win that he's had in the UFC has gone the distance. This is a guy that, like, he's had 3 takedowns, 4, 5, 7 in different wins that he's had. So I do think he absolutely has the grappling chops to survive any Kron Gracie submission attempts. I think he has the skill set to batter Kron Gracie on the feet and have Kron Gracie diving for his heels. And I do think that, like, he'll get Kron Gracie down. I think Kron Gracie at some point will invite that. But I don't necessarily think that Bryce Mitchell finishes this fight. I think the more likely scenario is actually Bryce Mitchell, maybe by TKO knockout, plus 650. But, like, Bryce Mitchell by decision is minus 200. I think that's probably the most single likely outcome of this. I do not think this is worth Kron Gracie by submission. I don't think anything on Kron Gracie is worth, not even a flyer on this one. I think Bryce Mitchell wins this fight probably like 90 to 95 times out of 100. What say you about this ridiculous main card fight?
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of what you said. And, we can kind of come back to this when we talk about some of the prelims, but I think it's ridiculous that this fight is even on the main card. Yeah, you have a guy that hasn't won since 2019 versus a guy that, just woke up from getting knocked out by Josh Emmett. I don't know. I do think Bryce Mitchell, I agree. He wins 90 to 95 out of 100. I mean, if you remember, he dropped Edson Barboza. Edson Barboza, is an elite striker. He's a very elite striker. And, getting knocked out by Josh Emmett, you got caught. A lot of great fighters get caught. It happens. Losing to Ilia Topuria is obviously an amazing champion. He just beat 2 of the best featherweights of all time. So, you can't really count that too much against him. So I think he's a well-rounded fighter. As much as I don't like a lot of the stuff that he says, I do think, part of me does think like, hell yeah, Arkansas boy, get those wins. So, looking at it objectively, I do think Bryce Mitchell is pretty well-rounded. I do think he avoids any submission attempts from Kron here. I think every second it's on the feet, he has a major advantage. I do like Bryce by decision. Bryce by knockout, maybe a good choice too. I mean, this is one of those fights, though, that I really hope we do see some grappling. Like that Bo Nickel versus Paul Craig fight, I can't tell you how disappointed I was that was a stand-up fight. I would have loved to see those guys grapple, and it just doesn't make any sense to me that they didn't. I don't think that raised Bo Nickel's stock much at all. I don't know what Paul Craig was doing, why he wasn't trying to pull guard at least once. So I won't get off too much of a tangent, but I would love to see these guys scramble a little bit. I want to see some good grappling here. I think that would make it an entertaining fight. And I don't know, maybe if that happens, they have some good grappling exchanges. Maybe at that point I can take back what I said, and maybe it's a main card worthy fight. But up until then, all Joe got shafted. Absolutely.
And now we have another featherweight matchup. This one sure to be a banger. We got Nate Landwehr against Doo-Hoo Choi. And Nate Landwehr is the slight favorite at minus 137. Choi, the plus 117 underdog. Starting off with Choi, 1 win since 2016 in the UFC with some long periods of inactivity. All right, so he's been back really since February of 2023 when there was a majority draw against Kyle Nelson back at UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Spivak. And then he is coming off a second-round knockout win over Bill Algeo just in July. But, there was the 3-fight losing streak to Cub Swanson, to Jeremy Stevens, and to Charles Jourdain. All were great fights with great action. He always brings it. And this one is designed to just be like a bloody battle. Nate Landwehr, all right, winner of 4 of his last 5 fights dating back to October of 2021. Submission victories over Ludwig Klein with an anaconda choke, a rear naked choke over Austin Lingo. He won that majority decision in that ridiculous comeback, crazy, like possible fight of the year candidate back in August 2022 against David Onama. And then the one loss in that time was by unanimous decision to Dan Ige. He is coming off a first-round knockout victory over Jamal Emmers March of this year. So this is one where, like, I don't think it is at all necessary to pick an outcome, like to pick a method of victory. This is one where I think you just go money line, because between these two guys, it is going to be utter chaos. And trying to pin down, oh, there's some scientific phrase for this, but whatever, doesn't matter. Trying to pin down a specific method of victory here is going to be wild. Now, either of them by knockout, I think, could make sense. It's really hard to knock Nate Landwehr out. It's been proven possible against Doo-Ho Choi. It's maybe if you're going to go one guy inside the distance, maybe you end up going Landwehr plus 145. But really, I think you just look at the recent body of work. I think Doo-Ho Choi's been around for so long and been in so many battles, but those battles are based on him taking a lot of damage. Nate Landwehr can take a lot of damage, but he is a versatile MMA fighter with versatile submission chops, as we've seen. He is incredibly tough to put away. And Doo-Ho Choi, as much of an animal as he is, Nate Landwehr is a Tennessee junkyard dog. I think Nate Landwehr wins this fight 60 to 65 times out of 100, maybe 70. Give me minus 137 on the money line. What do you think about this featherweight fight?
Yeah, I think this is going to be an amazing fight. First and foremost, these guys both have shown in the past that they're absolutely willing to get in there and throw down and just, throw caution to the wind. So this is definitely a made card worthy fight. It's a great main card opener. I'm excited for it. I do agree. I think Nate Landwehr, I think he's a very solid fighter. He's well-rounded. He's durable. He's tenacious. I think he's one of those guys that I don't know if he'll ever crack the top 15. Maybe with a favorable matchup, he may hover around that 13 to 15 spot sometime eventually. But I think he's one of those guys that if you put him against an unranked fighter like Doo-Ho Choi, who's a great fighter in his own right, but I don't think he's, top 15 material, at least as of now. I think Nate Land will win that most of the time, and I think he's shown that. So I anticipate, a bloodbath. I think Nate Landwehr has a good edge here, and I think I agree exactly with what you said. The odds are close enough. Just pick one fighter straight up. I like Landwehr money line here.
And now we have a light heavyweight matchup between former title challengers, one of which should have been handed the belt, one of which should not. We got Dominic Reyes against Anthony Lionheart Smith. Dominic Reyes, the minus 360 favorite. Anthony Smith, the plus 295 underdog. Starting off with Anthony Smith. All right. Loser of 4 of his last 6 fights, dating back to July 2022. Losses to Magomed Ankalaev, Johnny Walker, red flag. Knockout against Khalil Roundtree that sent him into a different universe. And then Roman Dolidze, most recently at UFC 303, outstriking him 100 to 51 in that fight. His 2 wins, his 3 most recent wins, 2 of them came against Ryan Spann. 2 years apart, his 2 wins in a row were Ryan Spann, even though there were 2 fights in between them. So he has a split decision win over Ryan Spann, August of 2023, and a guillotine finish over Vitor Petrino. It was too early for Petrino, as we saw in that one. But, it's insane, dude. You go back, he does have wins against Rashad Evans, Shogun, Volkan, Gustafsson. But since the Gustafsson fight, and after he got absolutely demolished by Glover Teixeira, he has not been the same human being. The most impressive wins in that span are Spann and Jimmy Crute. I think you'd have to say Jimmy Crute is the second most impressive win to Ryan Spann, because there haven't been many to go around. And losing to Johnny Walker is when it felt like it was very much the beginning of the end, because up till that point, you could say that only the best light heavyweights in the world had beaten Anthony Smith. And we have a lot of evidence to tell us now that Johnny Walker is not going to get to that point. Dominic Reyes. So, oh, God. He gets the title shot against John Jones after beating Cannonier, OSP, Volkan, and Chris Weidman. Clearly wins 3 of 5 rounds against John Jones, February of 2020. Loses by unanimous decision. I'm leaning out of my camera view. This is going to mess up the video. Should have been the light heavyweight champion. And you can't cite to me the fact that he then goes on to lose those 3 fights in devastating fashion as reason why he did not beat John Jones. It doesn't matter. In that fight, he won 3 of 5 rounds against John Jones. History, like, as time passes, people may have changed their tune on that, which is crazy. But then he goes on that additional 3-fight losing streak where he gets blasted by Jan, knocked out by Jiri, and then knocked out by Ryan Spann, November of 2022. Curious. That should be a bigger red flag in this matchup. But then comes back after almost 2 years, June of 2024, just this year, gets a first-round knockout over Dustin Jacoby, where he looked fantastic. I think, I think that we have seen evidence that fighting John Jones, it has a hangover effect. Just like for a college football team getting ready to play Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State, you put so much into the process of preparing. And when you don't get the result that you want, I think there is a very real hangover effect that we see for people. We saw it with Anthony Smith and with Thiago Santos. Reyes looked great in his last fight. And, neither of these guys are on the right side of age, but like Dominic Reyes at the very least is a little bit younger. He does have a 1-inch reach advantage. He's coming off of a recent win where he looked good. And Anthony Smith has been on a very clear on a very clear decline. So I think Dominic Reyes minus 360, maybe that's people hating on Anthony Smith a lot, but it is what it is at this point. I just don't know how to bet this. I guess I would have to go like Dominic Reyes by knockout, minus 150. Maybe by decision plus 400, but Dominic Reyes does have a very good track record of finishing people, especially by knockout. Even getting finished himself, he doesn't open up to the same kinds of finishes that Anthony Smith can still get at this point in his career, which are opportunistic submissions, And so Dominic Reyes by knockout minus 150, I think that's the way to go. I know that you feel strongly about Dominic Reyes in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Dominic Reyes takes 90 to 95 times out of 100. And I agree with a lot of what you said. I think Anthony Smith is a shell of himself, of his former self. I don't think his former self was an elite fighter anyway. He had really good wins. I think he was a really solid fighter, but I don't think he was ever that championship elite level. And mentally, I think he has some things working against him. I think part of it, really isn't his fault, but he had his teeth handed to him by Glover Teixeira. That is just absolutely brutal. If somebody's beating me up in a fight and they hand me my own teeth and say, sorry, it's just work, or I can't remember exactly. Yeah, that just has to break you mentally. And then he, gets his home invaded by some guy hopped up on meth and, beat him up, but apparently the guy just wouldn't go away. That has to do something to you mentally too. And I think that's shown by him telling Johnny Walker that he was attacking his family, which is top 10 weirdest moments of the UFC. But yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I don't think Anthony Smith has the power to knock out Dominic Reyes, and I think that's really working against him this fight. I also think that Dominic Reyes I think it was like a year and a half, almost 2 years off, was a really smart move. He came back looking great. I think he still holds that athleticism that propelled him to the top, and I think he gets a good win here. I would say Reyes by knockout. I don't know. Reyes straight up is obviously the odds aren't that great, but maybe throw it in with a parlay or two or something. But I think this is going to be a vintage Reyes performance. I really hope it is. I would love to see Reyes kind of return to form. And if you look at who's beaten him, barring the Ryan Spann knockout, which I don't want to say it's a fluke. I don't think there's ever a fluke in a fight. I think he just got caught. Spann is a lot of things, and he is a powerful puncher. So, I like Reyes a lot here. I'm taking him all day.
And now, Connor, we move on to what I now think is the toughest fight to bet so far. Welterweight. Themba Gorimbo against Vicente Luque. This was supposed to be Vicente Luque versus Nick Diaz. And Nick Diaz has some of his own problems, so he's not going to be fighting on Saturday. In fact.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie. And don't be scared, Vicente Luque as the underdog, plus 129. Themba Gorimbo, the minus 149 favorite. Themba Gorimbo, after losing his UFC debut to AJ Fletcher, just about a year and like 3/4 ago, February 2023. So his activity's been great. This is going to be his 4th fight of 2024. Has wins over Takashi Sato, over Pete Rodriguez, over Ramiz Brahimaj, and Nico Price. He got 7 takedowns against Nico Price just back in October. And he has a knockout over Pete Rodriguez. 2 knockdowns in his UFC career. Vicente Luque, if you can believe it, Connor, is actually younger by 10 months than Themba Gorimbo. UFC career dates back to 2015. High level of activity for him. Very few losses in the UFC for Luque. Really, a bunch of winning streaks. You go back to May of 2020. Winner of 5 of his last 8 fights against Nico Price, Randy Brown, Tyron Woodley, Michael Chiesa. Those were all finishes. Then he loses a unanimous decision to Belal Muhammad in a fight where he did outstrike Belal 84-60, got taken down 5 times. Loses to Jeff Neal by 3rd round knockout, gets a unanimous decision over Rafael Dos Anjos, and then he just got knocked out by Joaquin Buckley in March of 2024. Connor, it feels insane that Vicente Luque is the underdog in this one. Like, it feels insane when you look at the quality of wins that Themba Gorimbo actually has. And you look at the fighters that Vicente Luque has actually had to fight. And is he a guy that looked like a shell of his former self against Joaquin Buckley? For sure. But Buckley, is rising up the ranks. This is always a guy that can make people look like shells of their former selves with some of the highlight reel knockouts that he's had in his career. I don't think Themba Gorimbo is going to be able to take Vicente Luque down 7 times like he did against Nico Price. I think Vicente Luque is, going to be looking for some takedowns in his own right. But if this one stays on the feet, I think that it's anybody's fight. Like, Themba Gorimbo has never landed more than 68 strikes across a 3-round fight. Against Takashi Sato, he only landed 33, and against Ramiz Brahimaj, he only landed 43. This is not a guy that we've seen tremendous volume from. Now, Themba by knockout, if you're really thinking that Vicente Luque has taken too much damage in his UFC career and that these are not the same 2 guys born in 1991, Gorimbo by knockout is plus 550. By decision is plus 130. Ultimately, I'm very tempted with Luque moneyline plus 129.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what you said. You're right. It's such a weird one to bet because Gorimbo, he's an athletic guy, but like you said, he's not a volume guy. I don't know. What really worries me is where Luque is at mentally, both literally his brain and just his mental state. That fight against Buckley, to your point, Buckley is a very dangerous fighter. He does make a lot of guys look like a former shell of himself, but that fight still worried me. I don't know. Luque just kind of went down without even trying anything and just kind of accepted defeat. Yeah, he just kind of accepted defeat there. I don't know, it was weird. I think if you remove the Buckley fight, if that Buckley fight never happened, I think Luque would be like a plus 800 right now. Something crazy, or not plus 800, minus 800. I think you'd be a heavy favorite coming off a win against RDA, a 5-round win where he looked pretty good. So I don't know. I think if Luque has just sorted out his mental state and he is, recovered physically and mentally, I think he wins this 9 times out of 10. But I think it's just one of those fights where if Luque, comes in timid, comes in gun shy, just comes in not mentally prepared to fight, he's going to lose. So, yeah, this is a weird one to bet on. I mean, I think if I'm going to bet on it at all, I'm just going to take Luque money line because Luque clearly has a way better track record. He has wins against really, really solid fighters. He's consistently won against solid fighters. And yeah, like I said, if that Buckley fight never happened, I would be taking Luque, no question. So I really don't want to second guess that too much, I feel like.
And, maybe it's a psychological swing. Like maybe Luque, he was preparing for what was going to be like not a BMF fight, but like, of a similar feel against Nick Diaz. But does he want to lose to Thimba Garimbo? Like Thimba Garimbo, I think is like a fine guy to have on undercards and on fight nights, but I don't really believe in like a super high ceiling for Thimba Garimbo. So does that motivate him? Is that a high motivator? I don't know. And are you cool to talk about like 3 or 4 more?
Yep, let's do it.
All right, so we got a featherweight matchup, a fight that should so easily be on the main card. There's been a lot of talk about it this week. We got Movsar Evloev against Aljamain Sterling. Aljo is going to be in this one the plus 213 underdog. Movsar Evloev, the minus 248 favorite. Movsar, 18-0 as a professional fighter, undefeated in the UFC, obviously. Just to go back to June of 2021, all right? And he's fought about, like, after 2021, it's been once a year. And now this is going to be a second fight of 2024. But this guy's got wins over Hakeem Dawodu by decision where he got 9 takedowns. And this is an important, I guess it'd be important for DFS, but you got to look at this matchup stylistically. Took down Dan Ige 9 times en route to a unanimous decision. Took down Diego Lopez 4 times and landed 88 strikes for a UD. And then took down Arnold Allen 5 times, got outstruck 59-51, ends up getting the unanimous decision at UFC 297. Aljamain Sterling, on the other hand, after he lost the bantamweight belt to Sugar Sean O'Malley by second-round knockout back in August of 2023, he comes back and wins a unanimous decision at featherweight against Calvin Kattar, outstriking him 39-8 with 8 takedowns. There are 2 people since January of 2017 that have beaten Aljamain Sterling. Marlon Moraes and Sean O'Malley, both by knockout. Aljo has wins over Cody Stamann, Brett Johns, Jimmy Rivera, Pedro Munoz, Corey Sandhagen, Piotr Jan. The first one didn't really count, but then he gets a split decision against him in the rematch. Beats TJ Dillashaw, beats Henry Cejudo. Do you view this as disrespect towards Aljo? Because we know that this is a guy that people like to hate, too. Movsar, still definitely Aljo is a little bit unproven at featherweight with the win over Calvin Kattar. But Movsar Evloev, I think, if you remove the Diego Lopez win, I have a lot more questions about him. But you string together Arnold Allen, Diego Lopez after Dan Ige, I'm very much willing to believe, that this guy is very good and very well could challenge for the featherweight belt one day. But Aljo being such a heavy underdog at plus 213, that's not what I expected. I thought that this would be just a little bit closer handicap. So I have to say, I'm a little bit tempted by Aljo money line, because do I think Movsar is going to take down Aljo 9 times? Not necessarily. And Aljo, landed 135 strikes on the feet against Cejudo, knocked out TJ Dillashaw, landing 72 strikes. And Aljo plays good defense a lot of the time. He only let TJ Dillashaw and Calvin Kattar land a combined 16 strikes against him. Outstruck Peter Yan, in their first fight, that ended in the DQ, and that he was, at least I thought he was losing to that point. What do you think about this one? I think this is another really tough one to call, because Aljo is now, he's 5 years older than Movsar, born in 1989.
Yeah, this is an interesting matchup. I think it'll be a good fight. I think the biggest tragedy is that this is not on the main card. I can't believe that they put Bryce Mitchell and Kron Gracie on the main card over this. But we already talked about that, so I won't dive too much further into it. This is such an interesting matchup, and I think Evloev, he just not really impressed me very much. Yes, he beat Diego Lopez, but Diego Lopez took that fight on short notice and gave him a hell of a fight. Yes, he beat Arnold Allen, but I thought Arnold Allen won that fight. I think the knees that he threw were legal. First of all, they are certainly legal under the new rules, but I thought even under the old rules, I thought every knee he hit was legal. He pulled his hand off the mat for pretty much every single one, and I think that was a big catalyst in that fight. He did some damage, and I think the judges kind of viewed it as not significant because the ref said it was an illegal strike. So I am not convinced that he won that Arnold Allen fight. That being said, Arnold Allen is a much different fighter than Aljamain. They have very different fight styles. it's tough because you know how good is Aljo off of his back? I really can't remember him being on his back very many times. What do you think? Can you remember any times Aljo was significantly on his back for like long period? Was he very active looking for submissions, or what do you think?
I mean, I more so like I more so trust his grappling to just like I think it's a little bit more depend. I mean, like you have to go back a long time, but like I saw, the Takeya Mizugaki fight recently. I mean, that's now like a decade ago. But he's like all just like crafty, Like Movzar is a little bit more of a straightforward fighter. Also,
Hmm.
the Funk Master is just a little bit more just crafty, I guess would be the word. Like he's a crafty grappler. He scrambles well. I more so just trust him to not end up on his back for too long. I guess you could look to his
Hmm.
camp for like the kind of grappling chops that it. We know that he's very good with some opportunistic submissions. I do think you have talked me into like kind of favoring Aljo money line plus 213. Like, but Mubzar by decision minus 145, I think is the one method of victory pick that I would make here. I don't feel the need to go method of victory with Aljo, especially when by decision is plus 300. And like by submission plus 700, I think Mubzar like might just be able to maintain a little bit more control than that. But like,
Hmm.
I think like Aljo's key to this fight, like it'll be very helpful to stay on your feet. If he's able to take Mobzar down, all the better. Because then I definitely have less faith in Mobzar off of his back against Aljo. But overall, I'm probably most comfortable here. Aljo money line plus 213. If I'm going Mobzar, it's by decision minus 145. I think that's a safe number.
Yeah, if you go most far, definitely by decision. He doesn't have a finish in the UFC. I think one factor to consider here. What's the reach? What does the reach look like for these fighters?
So Aljo is actually going to be a 1 inch reach disadvantage.
For Aljo? I think that is a factor. I think Aljo was very effective using his reach at bantamweight, and I think taking that away from him will maybe give him some trouble. Um, I don't know. I feel like Evloev is going to win by decision, but I would love to see Aljo win. I think Aljo has more ways to win than Evloev does. Yeah, I'm just interested to see how this one ends up. I think if you're going to bet, either take Aljo money line or Evloev by decision.
And now we have a welterweight matchup between one guy, well, like possibly like one of my like slept on most favorite fighters in the UFC. We got Randy Brown against Brian Battle. Brian Battle, the minus 225 favorite. Randy Brown, the plus 190 underdog. Starting off with Randy Brown, actually on a 3-fight winning streak, which includes wins over Wellington Turman, Muslim Salikov, and Elijah Zaleski dos Santos, most recently at UFC 302. He's the winner of 7 of his last 8 fights. The most impressive names on that list, they're not great. Like, it's Elijah, it's Chaos Williams. But besides that, it's not a lot of like impressive names that he has added to that. He did, as I saw one person say it, send Muslim Salikov to the Shadow Realm back in February of this year. But like every time this guy is faced like a too much more of an uptick in competition, he doesn't measure up. Now the one loss that he's had since August of 2020 is to Jack Della Maddalena, and I can't hold that too hard against him. Brian Battle. All right, this guy should be on a 4-fight winning streak because, as he said, he was whooping Angel Luz's ass before that ended up being a no contest. Everybody loved his performance against Kevin Jousset in France. Nobody thought he was going to go in there and lose a fist fight to a French dude, and he ended up knocking him out in the second round, outstriking him 97 to 58. Now, the one blemish on his record is that like bad loss to Renat Fakhretdinov, where he got outstruck 43 to 3, got knocked down, he got taken down 7 times. And this is a guy that is yet like the wins against Gabe Green and Kevin Jousset, they brought this dude along very steadily because people like to see him win. Fans love Brian Battle. Brian the Butcher Battle, formerly Brian Pooh Bear Battle. One thing I was concerned with against Jousset, while that was a great performance and it got him a lot of fans, he still took like an unnecessary amount of damage. I thought he was not careful against Kevin Jusay, and that's what people want to see. But that can be dangerous against Randy Brown. We have seen Randy Brown land some very hard knockout victories in the UFC over a long span of time. I have to say, like, I didn't think Brian Battle would be this heavily favored. So, like, having to pick one here, like, Randy Brown, most of his UFC losses have been inside the distance, and he got knocked out by Nico Price back in July of 2018. I think that's a little bit more telling. Like, Brian Battle by knockout, or Brian Battle, better yet, inside the distance, is plus 110. I think that's where I would end up going. Like, Brian Battle, he does have that rear naked choke victory over AJ Fletcher. He got a submission victory over Gilbert Urbina. Obviously, Randy Brown is a much higher caliber opponent than that. But, like, Battle inside the distance, plus 110. He's riding a great wave of momentum. It should be greater. And, like, if I'm going Randy Brown, I don't think you do. I think you go moneyline Randy Brown if you like him, plus 190. I haven't seen anything to necessarily say that Brian Battle gets knocked out by Randy Brown, though that could, at plus 525 for Randy Brown, it could happen because, again, I thought Brian Battle took an unnecessary amount of damage against Kevin Jusay. He was very fired up for that fight in France, but still. But and maybe I'm biased here because I love Brian Battle, but I think Brian Battle inside the distance plus 110.
Yeah, I love Brian Battle a lot too. I'm very glad he changed his nickname. The Butcher is way cooler than Pooh Bear. But I do think this is not a great matchup for him. I think if he approaches this fight the way he approached the fight against Jusay, he is going to get pieced up. Absolutely. Randy Brown is a sniper. He's long. He's crafty. He's precise. So I think if the Battle goes out there and fights like he fights most of his fights, he's going to get pieced up. Does he land a knockout shot? He certainly could. But I think if he's getting pieced up, I don't think he'll be able to. So I don't know. I kind of like Randy Brown here. Just Randy Brown money line. He's on a hot streak. I just think Battle is going to take too many chances. I don't think his head movement is good. I don't think his defensive striking or striking defense is going to be great here. And I think Brown is going to expose that. I like Randy Brown straight up. I don't know if you want to try to get some more money out of it, maybe by knockout, but Battle is very tough. So I think decision would be more likely.
Yeah, and honestly, the more I think about that, I do like Brown maybe by knockout plus 525. Just if Battle doesn't make adjustments from the way he fought against Kevin Jusay, that's going to be a problem.
Exactly.
But Brian Battle is a big welterweight. Like this is a guy that like came up at middleweight. He is a big welterweight. Always looks big to me. But still, like I'm going to be rooting for him hardcore, but like he really needs to be more careful than he was against Kevin Jusay, as we have discussed. And so now, Connor, we're getting into the geriatric portion of the card. And so if you're cool to talk about two more, we've got a catchweight fight, a fight that was supposed to happen a couple weeks ago between Chris Weidman and Eric Anders. Now, I had a lot of fun discussing this by myself the first time because it's like, look, did Chris Weidman in part win that fight against Bruno Silva because of those eye pokes? You bet your ass he did. All right. We know that the eye pokes were a significant factor in that fight, but he did outstrike Bruno Silva 75-30, got a takedown, got a knockdown. He looked good against Bruno Silva. I was shocked that he looked, again, the pokes aside, remove those. And while you were watching that, you're going like, wow, Chris Weidman looks better than I expected. I think every other result besides that over the last few years, I mean, only has a few fights just since this decade started. But he won two of his last four. He had that horrific injury against Uriah Hall. He lost by unanimous decision to Brad Tavares. Very interesting story career for Chris Weidman, who won the UFC title against Anderson Silva 6 fights into his UFC career and one of the biggest upsets in mixed martial arts history. So, you're taking all these weird factors where, like, Chris Weidman is 40 years old, has had, that many fights, had that devastating injury against Uriah Hall and the layoff, everything that we has been very well documented. We all know. Eric Anders has lost 3 of his last 5 to Andre Muniz, Jung Young Park, and Marc-Andre Barrios. All right, I can forgive that. I can very easily forgive that. One of those wins was against Kyle Dawkins. That was a knockout December 2022, and he was still in the UFC. You really look through Eric Honder's career, they gave him opportunities, and he was never able to come up with a win against like a very big name opponent, ever. Mearshart and Darren Stewart might be the two biggest names that he's actually beaten in the UFC. They gave him Lyoto Machida way too early back in February of 2018. All that aside, Connor, March 2024, UFC Fight Night. Eric Anders is paired up against Jamie Pickett. He looked horrible in that fight. It was a sweat if you took Eric Anders. He needed to depend on the takedowns to beat Jamie Pickett on the judges' scorecards. 43 strikes landed in that fight. Jamie Pickett rocked him in that fight. Very concerning. So the odds on this fight, Weidman is the minus 111. Very, 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 very slight favorite. This is essentially, pick 'em. At pick 'em, I'm going Weidman based off their two most recent performances. Maybe it's simplistic. Maybe it's just based on the optics. But if you're going off the optics of their last fight, Chris Weidman looked good. Eric Anders looked horrible. And it's not like Eric Anders, as I've put many times, any spring chicken, born April of 1987. Those recent performances, I just have to say, like, pick them. I think Weidman actually might win this fight 55 times out of 100.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of really good points, and honestly, I haven't really thought that too much in depth about it, especially based on their recent performances. My attitude kind of for this one, and after what you said, I am rethinking it, but at the same time, I think I'm going to stick with it. I think Father Time is undefeated. I think Chris Weidman like you said, they're similar age, but I think Chris Weidman his career has put more damage on his body than it has for Anders. I think Anders still has that athleticism and has that ability to, scramble, throw hard shots, take damage. I don't think Weidman has that. And I think unless Weidman employs those eye pokes that he did against Bruno Silva, I think Anders is going to take it here. But I don't know. I very well could be wrong. Weidman could be making a comeback, but I think if Anders, can just throw some leg kicks, I think that will slow down Weidman significantly, as we saw against who was his fight? Brad Tavares. As we saw against Brad Tavares, I think just a few well-placed leg kicks will slow down Weidman enough for Anders to be able to tee off. So that's how I kind of see it.
And now, one more fight, Connor, and then we'll let you go. This one, sure to be a banger. In my favorite division, the UFC men's flyweight division, we got Cody Durden against Joshua Van. This deserves this.
Break out the red panties.
Joshua Van. God, maybe I should change that soundbite now, given the recent litigation.
God.
Cody Durden is the plus 130 underdog. Joshua Van, the minus 150 favorite. Cody Durden, all right, vocal on the internet, always calling out people. This guy's actually won 5 of his last 7 fights. The only losses coming by second-round finish to Tajir Ulanbekov and Bruno Silva. And, he's had to fight some tough guys, for sure, in the UFC. He's gone back and forth between flyweight and bantamweight. He was one of Muhammad Makayev's victories coming up. But, the first 2 wins on his 4-fight winning streak back in 2022 to 2023 was JP Buys and Carlos Mata. That doesn't do much for me. But then he ends up getting wins over Charles Johnson and Jake Hadley. The Jake Hadley win actually looks way less impressive in hindsight, but the Charles Johnson win still holds weight, especially taking him down 11 times. And comes off a second-round guillotine victory over Matt Schnell September of 2024. Cody Durden is a little bit more well-rounded, but this dude, he comes to make exciting fights. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily end up that way, but this guy is good for some very exciting matchups. And that's why, the Matt Schnell matchup was fantastic, and it was the biggest win for him to date. And then Joshua Van. Joshua Van is a guy that I think entered the UFC flyweight rankings. He might still be there, just right on the border. But, he ended up being a feather in the cap of Charles Johnson back in July of 2024 by third-round knockout. And this is one where the math doesn't work. Charles Johnson looked a whole lot better against Joshua Van than he did, against Cody Durden. He had improved a lot. I think the matchup was better for Joshua Van against Charles Johnson against Joshua Van. And this is the thing. Joshua Van is a guy that fills up with volume strikes. He throws hard shots. Only one knockout in the UFC, but has landed 120, 156, 118, 83 strikes in the fight that he knocked out Felipe Bunez. Most recently, September this year at UFC 306, he is coming off a unanimous decision victory with 3 takedowns and 118 strikes against Edgar Chairez. So here's the thing, all right? If Cody Durden comes to brawl, it's made for Joshua Van. And I think that Charles Johnson is just a little bit more feathery on the feet to outlast Joshua Van, pick some spots a little bit more carefully. If Cody Durden comes to brawl, that's going to be a problem. If Cody Durden comes for an MMA fight, then I think Joshua Van, unless he's grown kind of mentally as a fighter, and he did get 3 takedowns against Chairez, and he had 2 against Kevin Borjas back in UFC 295. But if this is going to be an exciting fight, I see why Joshua Van is the slight favorite at -150. I am inclined to say Joshua, this is one where I would just go money line. I think that which of these two is most likely to get a finish? Probably Joshua Van. Probably. But which one is more likely to get just an it's weird to word it this way, but inside the distance for Cody Durden or by submission, I think those are some sneaky props here. Durden by submission is +600. If he's trying to win the fight, that's definitely an open opportunity for him. If there ends up being, 180 strikes combined, in this fight, that leans towards being an advantage for Joshua Van. I think -150 is a very fair number for Joshua Van. I wouldn't blame anybody for going Cody Durden +130 because I think there's a lot of toss-up elements of this matchup.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think it's a interesting matchup. I think it's very close. I think what you said, if it's a high volume kind of brawl style fight, I favor Joshua Van. And I think the energy of this card is going to turn that fight into exactly that, just a high paced brawl. So I think Joshua Van here, money line, is the way to go.
And I think for DFS purposes, guys, Joshua Van with that volume striking, if he is anywhere in the middle of the pack, I think that's worth a look. Folks, this has been Connor Bones Slone. Give it up for him. Connor, thanks so much for being here tonight. And looking forward to watching UFC 310 and discussing these things as they're going down.
Yep. Thanks, Brady. Our predictions are going to be 100% accurate, as always.
Peace. And folks, we got 3 fights left on the geriatric portion of this card. We got Michael Chiesa against Max Griffin. Michael Chiesa is the very slight favorite, -114. Max Griffin, the -106 underdog. Michael Chiesa is coming off of the Tony Ferguson victory by rear naked choke August of 2024. He had 3 straight losses before that, 2 by Darce choke to Vicente Luque and Kevin Holland, then lost the unanimous decision to Sean Brady November of 2021. Naturally, this guy's got a lot of career moves going on. His focus isn't, you can't say that it's completely on fighting, but he had that recent enough wins against RDA, Neil Magny, Tony Ferguson. We know who they're matching Michael Chiesa up against. Max Griffin will have a 1-inch reach advantage. Max Griffin actually closer to 40 by a couple of years than Michael Chiesa. He is coming off a split decision victory this year against Jeremiah Wells. Max Griffin's last 2 wins had both been by split decision. One was over Tim Means, who has looked more and more over the hill over these last couple of years. And then, you have to go back to July of 2021, his 3rd most recent victories against Carlos Condit. Lost a split decision to Neil Magny, lost a unanimous decision to Michael Morales. I mean, Max Griffin, always been a fun fighter, but besides wins over Mike Perry, Carlos Condit, there's always been a ceiling for Max Griffin. And I think Chiesa can still do this. Max Griffin, I will say, I mean, he's never lost by submission in the UFC. That is important. I don't think this ends up being like a terribly exciting fight, especially if Chiesa wins. Like, this could very well be a split if Chiesa just like struggles even a little bit to get Max Griffin down and hold him down. I could see these are going to be so tough to call, especially the one that we're talking about after this. But like a split decision victory for either of these two, like Chiesa by split plus 850, Griffin by split, maybe the one to look at because of his fight history, plus 800. I don't know, man. Money line Michael Chiesa minus 114. Bet with your heart, I guess, on this one. Max Griffin, again, is the older fighter here. And yeah, even on recent history, with the level of competition comparatively these two have faced, I think I still have to favor Michael Chiesa as a very, very slight favorite. So minus 114, that's probably as good as I'm going to feel about that one. Next up, 2 fights remaining. We've got a lightweight matchup between Clay, the Carpenter Guida, and Chase Hooper. Oh, boy. The Carpenter. He is the plus 750 underdog. Hooper, the minus 1,200 favorite. Let's start with Guida. All right. 2 wins since August of 2021 out of 6 fights, losses to Mark Madsen in that time. Claudio Puelles, Rafa Garcia, and Joaquim Silva. 3 of which came by decision. One was a split against Mark Madsen. Then he lost by submission by knee bar to Claudio Puelles. And, you know, the 2 wins against Scott Holtzman, that was a split decision. His win over Leonardo Santos was actually by second round rear naked choke, but that was already 3 years ago. December of 2021. And this dude was born in 1981. He is going to be 43 years old by the time this fight happens. His birthday's on Sunday. You get it. Chase Hooper is 18 years. He is a whole legal adult younger than Clay Guida. And, you know, Chase Hooper, a guy that people like to say continuously got fraud checked. I think that, like, that is an incorrect use of that term. But he is now on a 3-fight winning streak and has won 4 of his last 5. He finished Felipe Colares by 3rd-round knockout. He did get finished by Steve Garcia. Another loss was to Steven Peterson, and then Bruce Leroy was Alex Caceres was his first UFC loss. But he is on a 3-fight winning streak against Nick Fior, Jordan Leavitt, and Vyacheslav Borshev. 2 submissions in a row against Leavitt and Borshev. This is too much for Clay Guida at this point. Like, Chase Hooper's too young. Like, Clay Guida, he might give us some fun moments here, but like 43, that's too old to be fighting in the UFC. Chase Hooper is not like the opponents that they fed to Clay Guida to get him some victories, to, you know, to be able to include him on these cards. The key here is like picking the spot, you know, like, does this fight go over 1.5 rounds? I think that's possible. I think, you know, that's minus 145. Hooper by submission, minus 175. Hooper by knockout, plus 600. I think that's worthy of looking at it against a 43-year-old opponent. Inside the distance, Chase Hooper, minus 215. Maybe that's the one you go with. And you go, you know, inside the distance for Hooper, put it in a parlay. Otherwise, there's not a ton of value here. Maybe Hooper round 1 is plus 180. Hooper in round 2 is plus 280. Maybe give a look to those 2. But otherwise, this would be a weird way to send Clay Guida off after, you know, making his UFC debut back in 2006 and making his Strikeforce debut in 2006 as well. Clay Guida, we could do an entire hour-long podcast on this guy's career, 38-21 as a professional. And now we are on to the last fight, or the first fight of the night. This is Kennedy Nchegawu against Lucas Brzeski at heavyweight. And I'm going to find out, I forget what this fight was originally supposed to be. It was supposed to be Brzeski against Taliesin Teixeira. And Kennedy Nchegawu, I want to see what the canceled fight was. 13-5, by the way. This guy transitioned to heavyweight. Come on. The moment I get onto Tapology, everything slows down. That's going to kill me. Born in 1992. 9 wins by knockout in his career, 3 by decision, 1 by submission. He's coming off an easy first-round knockout victory against Chris Barnett, October of 2024. All right, so there wasn't one cancel leading up to this, but he did have the 2 counts against Marcus Rogerio de Lima and Justin Tafa before Chris Barnett ultimately stepped in. So things weren't going his way at light heavyweight for Kennedy. And, had the losses to Dustin Jacoby and OSP, despite, 3-fight winning streak against Carl Roberson, Ian Kudalaba, and Devin Clark. This guy's been around longer than you might expect. Has a win over Carlos Olberg by second-round knockout back in 2021. Wins over Darko Stasic, too. So, now that he's moved to heavyweight, he looks great, at least in his first fight against Chris Barnett. Lucas Bresky, loser of 4 of 6 in the UFC. He got that win over Walter Walker, which was very frustrating if you were backing Walter Walker, and I did. He got knocked out in the first round by Mick Parkin, July of this year at UFC 304. Got knocked out by Waldo Cortez Acosta. Split decision loss to Martin Bidet back in August of 2022, and a UD loss after 8 takedowns handed to him by Carl Williams. And he got submitted by he submitted Dylan Potter in the Contender Series back in 2021. And in this one, Kennedy is the minus 650 favorite. I think that's very fair. I do think Kennedy is worth a look in DFS. I think he's going to be expensive. But like Kennedy by knockout minus 155, I think that's the way to go in this one. Nothing has ever impressed me about Lucas Bresky. And that speaks about how unimpressive Walter Walker's UFC debut, where he was a heavy favorite against Lucas Bresky, ended up being. Where besides those takedowns, he had absolutely nothing to offer. But it's not that he hasn't had, Parkin, Acosta, Williams, that's as much of prospects as heavyweight can kind of offer a dude like Bresky. And he was a stepping stone for all of those dudes. Losing the split decision despite the 118 strikes to Martin Bidet, I actually thought that scoring was actually accurate, because Bidet is just that kind of fighter that can slow a pace and win 2 or 3 rounds even if you don't like it. So I'm going Kennedy by knockout minus 155. And folks, do I go by in first round? Yeah. If you really want to get crazy with it, Kennedy by knockout in round 1, that is plus 215. It's either Kennedy by knockout minus 155 or Kennedy in the first round by knockout plus 215. Folks, that is it for episode 160 of RotoBallers official MMA podcast. Tap that. Again, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. We got One Fight Night. We got Octagon. We got LFA this weekend for my picks and all that stuff and more. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Check out my MMA DFS Values Picks article that comes out on Friday afternoons. Come out to the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday. Let's talk about what you're doing for UFC 310. Let's talk about the action as it's going down. Folks, have yourselves a great week. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy these fights, and peace.